Hello and welcome back to the Mike's On with College Football Podcast. We're going to be discussing week 2 of the college football season. I know I didn't get out a preview episode. That's on me. I was at a wedding over the weekend and I just knew I wasn't going to be able to really watch a ton of the games that I was going to really want to talk about. And I ended up having to backlog a lot of it this week. And so we're going to talk about some of the stuff I was able to watch as well as just interesting games around the league that we saw last week in week 2. It was a huge week for upsets, especially for Sun Belt Conference teams. More into that in the early slate here. But yeah, buckle in and we're going to get right to it. So from the jump, we had Alabama going into Austin, Texas to take on the Longhorns. And a lot of people through the zeitgeist were saying that this was Alabama by 1 million. I think the line was somewhere around in the 20s, 21 points, 21 and a half, somewhere in there. And Alabama really struggled in this game from a line of scrimmage standpoint, from a wide receiver standpoint. It was tough for the Crimson Tide to just move the ball downfield effectively. Texas played one of the best games I've seen a Longhorns team play in like 10 years. Their quarterback, Quinn Ewers, gets knocked out in the first quarter. He came out and he was balling. He's a transfer from Ohio State. He came out, he hit 1 or 2 deep shots right off the rip, and he was looking excellent. So Alabama really struggles to pass the ball, and they have like 11 penalties at halftime. I think at the halftime, Alabama had 70 yards passing and like 80-some yards in penalty yards. It was ridiculous. Never seen an Alabama team this discombobulated. It was wild to see. Second half, more the same of Alabama struggling. Big thing here was Texas gets into the red zone, gets down inside the 5 3 times and kicks 3 field goals and misses one of them. Convert there and you probably win the game. Alabama gets the ball late with a $130, drives down, and Texas calls an excellent blitz from the right side. And Texas calls an excellent blitz from the right side, and Bryson Young, fucking A. Quarterback for Alabama, Bryce Young. Texas calls an excellent blitz from the right side, and Bryce Young for Alabama reads it and just evades the sack. I mean, it's one-on-one with him and like the slot corner or linebacker, and just rolls the guy off of him and scrambles for 20 yards to set up the game-winning field goal. Alabama wins 20-19. That's the worst I've seen Alabama look in a good while against a team that maybe is Texas good at this point. I mean, that's the takeaway here is Alabama going to struggle this year, or is Texas a competent football team that can hang with the top end of college football? And now we've seen this from Texas. They get up every year for their big games. They might have a big non-conference game that they do well in, and then they always get up to play Oklahoma. It's when they play Texas Tech, when they play TCU, when they go on the road to play Iowa State, if that happens. Do they bring their A game? If they bring this game, what they did on Saturday, if they do that every Saturday, shoot, this team's in the Big 12 title, no problem. Quinn Ewers is out 4 to 6 weeks. That defense looks nasty enough to hold them against anybody in the Big 12. So big ups to Texas, and we'll see if Bama can get something going in the passing game going forward. It's kind of fun early in the season, for me at least, when you see an Alabama team struggle, because Nick Saban's always going to figure it out. So now you get to kind of you get to look at the tape from 2 weeks. We'll see. They play Scrub City next week. I can't remember who that is. They'll play a team, and we can compare the tape and see what they have or have not done. All right, getting into the 3 big upsets from the Sun Belt East. Cut. We're going to check audio here. Make sure. From the Sun Belt East. Going to check our 3 week. Okay, cool. Actually, I can just keep that up. I don't need to keep the video up. So we're going to check into our 3 upsets that came out of the Sun Belt East this weekend. We had Marshall over Notre Dame. Marshall beats Notre Dame 26-21 in a game that, okay, Notre Dame, you have a new head coach going into bowl season last year. You lost in a bowl game to Oklahoma State. Understandable. Then you have the opener is against Ohio State. You look great in the first half and you lose. Got it. This was your game that you kind of needed to show up and proof of concept. Hey, we're here. We're ready to roll. And they came out and got pushed around by Marshall. And Marshall is not a team that returns a ton on the offensive line. I would actually argue their offensive line last year was more experienced than this year's. So if they'd played Marshall last year, that would have been crazy. Also, Marshall is without their top running back, Rashid Ali, who is out for personal reasons. They had a Florida State transfer in there that put up about 160 yards. This kid's like a sixth-year senior. And he was chugging through that Notre Dame defense, which obviously was doing very well against Ohio State. I think Marshall is a team that is going to take more of a ground and pound approach than Ohio State did late in that game. But aside from Notre Dame's poor defense, Tyler Buckner, their quarterback, looked very pedestrian. Obviously, you grain of salt against Ohio State in the week prior, but against this Marshall defense that, yes, does have the skill talent on the outside. Marshall's defense was good last year. This is a team that I was very high on coming into this year. They made the transition to the Sun Belt, which was awesome, but did not think that they would produce at this high of a level against a Notre Dame team that pretty much actually looks like they don't have the receivers that they need to run the offense they want. And Tyler Buckner, late in the game, throws a pick six. Notre Dame has a world-class tight end, Gronkowski-type figure, big, tall, catch radius, can block, just a coverage nightmare. They put him in a motion from one side of the line to the other, motioned him out basically in a stack behind the inside receiver on the right side. And, I'm watching that like, okay, they're going to run some type of like rub route for him. The guy he's in front of just runs and takes the safety away, and he runs a 5-yard out. Wide open. Completely wide open. Marshall doesn't cover it well. Buckner just stares down the receiver on his left, who's running just an in, or he's running a curl, and I don't know why he stares him down, but he doesn't get open, and he forces it over there, and it's a pick six to put Marshall up late, and then Marshall ends up getting the ball back, or just forcing Notre Dame to. Notre Dame actually scores with like 14 seconds left, but they don't get the onside kick. So Notre Dame and that schedule this year, not easy. They've got UNC coming up. They've got Cal coming up. If they don't beat Cal, and they go start 0-3. Oh boy. It's gonna get tense in South Bend. Then they go to UNC in 2 weeks, who's off this week. They needed it. They'll get Josh Downs back. Then they got to cover Josh Downs. This Notre Dame team, it's very interesting early in the season what's going on with Notre Dame. We got Georgia Southern going into Lincoln, Nebraska, and they win against a Nebraska team that has looked shaky as of late, 45-42. For those of you that don't know, Georgia Southern beats Nebraska 45-42. For those of you that don't know, Georgia Southern fired their head coach after the first 2 weeks last year. They ended up hiring Clay Helton, who got fired at USC. And they got that deal done like by the beginning of October. So he's been boots on the ground for a little bit there, in terms of just recruiting and whatever. So Georgia Southern has run the triple option for the better part of the last 40 years. And just now this year are transitioning out of the triple option. Take notes, Georgia Tech, because they put up 450 passing yards on Nebraska. Their quarterback they got as a transfer. His name's Kyle Van Treese. He's a 6-year guy. Through 2 games, he is 66 for 102, 776 passing yards, 5 TDs, 3 picks. He had 2 touchdowns of those against Nebraska. So Nebraska their defense didn't look great. We already knew that. But against a first-year spread team, they give up 45 points. And this wasn't even like a comeback for Georgia Southern. This was back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Absolutely ridiculous that Nebraska gives this up. This ends up actually resulting in the firing of Scott Frost that happened earlier this week. And are very interesting of note. So Scott Frost, I think this was his 4th year in Nebraska. Maybe he might have been entering his 5th. Played at Nebraska, quarterback during the glory years in the 90s of Nebraska football. And he actually took a pay cut going into the season. He fired multiple coordinators from last season, and brought in new people to help innovate things that were happening, especially on offense. They were pretty stale on offense. They went 3-9 last year and were probably considered the best 3-9 team of all time, considering how many just close games they played. They almost beat Michigan. They should have beat Michigan last year, who went on to go to the college football playoff. So anyway, Scott Frost does all this to kind of placate and show good faith towards the school, takes the pay cut, brings in new people, Mark Whipple, especially from Pitt, who was the offensive coordinator there last year with Kenny Pickett chucking the ball around. More on Pitt later. Does all this, and they dump the first game in Dublin against Northwestern. They barely they look sloppy as hell against North Dakota 2 weeks ago. And then in this game, couldn't stop a nosebleed. So they end up firing him. They got Oklahoma on deck. It's at home. Biggest thing for Nebraska they got right now is they got a sellout streak for like 20-some years. I mean, people show up to that game. They're the only show in town. So, and they got the Big Ten money. Big Ten signed a 7-year, $1 billion TV deal with a litany of major networks. I think it was Fox, CBS, and NBC. Like, they got the bag, and they can use it. He also, Scott Frost, last season or going into the season, altered his buyout language to where it dropped to a $7.5 million buyout for his contract at the beginning of October. And it's so bad that the AD just pulled the trigger anyway. $17 million buyout, and just said, we're done. We're not having this anymore. We'll see. Against Oklahoma this week, maybe they come out with some juice, and I hope so. Oklahoma really shouldn't play at anybody, so if they punch them in the mouth early, hey, this is Oklahoma's first kind of adversity-based game where they're traveling to a home crowd or an away crowd. So the biggest upset of the weekend in the Sun Belt Conference. The boys of App State, Mountaineers. Love them. Got to get a hat up there for them. They go to College Station, Texas A&M, who preseason, some people had them in the college football playoff. Maybe even winning the SEC West over Alabama. They go in there, and they win. Oh, Mike, they probably scored, right? I mean, they put up 61 against UNC. I mean, that defense of theirs gave up 63 points to UNC last week. It's not like they're going to win with defense, right? Oh, buddy. They win 17-14 over the most woeful, sad, decrepit Texas A&M offense I have ever seen Jimbo Fisher put on the field. Now, I haven't done an SEC West preview yet, and to be honest, we're probably going to be abandoning some of the previews. We'll get them next year. Texas A&M lost all 5 starters at the offensive line, maybe 4 or 5 after last season. So they're replacing a lot up front, but hey, Jimbo's been recruiting out there, right? He's got to be able to put that talent forward and, have a solid line. Haynes King, second year in the program, top flight recruit. They brought in Max Johnson from LSU as a transfer to create some quarterback battle in the offseason. Pause for water. Right? They got to know what they're doing. They struggled last week against Sam Houston State. We didn't really talk about that, but only 31 points against a good FCS team, but come on, you're A&M. You got to hang 50 burger out there. And I'll tell you, this game was 17-14. A&M scored on a kickoff return. So they only had 7 offensive points in 60 minutes of football. They had 181 yards passing, and I think they had on third down, they were 1 of 10, 11, whatever they were. I mean, it is disgusting what they are putting on the field as a product for offense right now. Defense, shoot. 17, you got to be able to win that. And App State kicks that field goal late. App State kind of shot itself in the foot early. I got the footage going on right here. I mean, App State had the opportunities to kick multiple field goals, and I think they missed one early, and I think they went for it after that when they got the ball again back in the red zone. So App left points on the field. So now college game day is going to Boone next week. App versus Troy. We'll talk about that tomorrow. And A&M is going to host Miami next week. That's actually a really interesting matchup. That'll be a battle of 2 defenses, and we'll see where that goes. I mean, probably we're going to take the under. We'll see. We'll talk about it more on Thursday. But, man, big win for App State. Biggest, top 10 win. Hadn't happened since Michigan. Blocked field goal back in 2007. But, man, Sun Belt East. Those are 3 teams. Georgia Southern, Marshall, App State. They're all from the same division of one conference. One conference who has targeted teams regionally in the South that aren't big markets. Boone doesn't even have an airport. Georgia Southern's in the Statesboro. Marshall is in basically Ohio, if you look at a map. But they all got history with each other. App State and Marshall used to play FCS ball, then it was D1 AA back in the 90s and 80s, and they were smacking each other upside the head. And Georgia Southern and App been playing FCS AA ball back and forth. They're big rivals. I mean, these fans care. These teams care about killing and beating each other. And when you pick programs that care about their football team and the fans care and there's investment from the alumni and the institution itself over a continuous period of time. These are all teams that moved up. Marshall moved up from FCS. App State moved up from FCS. So did Georgia Southern. These aren't teams that just landed at the D1 level, born on third base kind of deal. They built their programs. And that's what the Sun Belt has developed in the conference, is teams that have showed continuous input and growth into their programs, and it shows. Gesturing at my notes. But it shows. It's wild. Awesome slate right there of upsets. Anyway, we got to get into the rest of it. So we get into an SEC matchup. Now, South Carolina, Arkansas. Why are we talking about South Carolina again? Because I want to watch more of Spencer Rattler, as we talked about earlier. He kind of gives South Carolina this possible ceiling that really could propel South Carolina, or the bottom could fall out. And as of right now, very uneasy. The Spencer Rattler experience is an inconsistent and wild ride. He's got two turnovers this past weekend, 1 interception, 1 fumble. And he had a really wonky, he had a play, he was backing up into his own end zone, they're down late, and he just literally has the ball slip out of his hands as he's under pressure, and it doesn't get to the line of scrimmage and just bounces out of bounds. And they just ends up taking a safety because it's intentional grounding in the end zone, because there was nobody in the area, and he didn't get it beyond the line of scrimmage. Just a weird fluke. It wasn't of consequence that put Arkansas up 44. He had 6 sacks. Now, that offensive line we talked about for South Carolina had a lot of experience. 144 starts they were returning. Wow, that's awesome. It doesn't matter because it's bad. 6 sacks. Now, some of that is him just holding the ball too long. Spencer Rattler reads the defense, and because of that arm talent, I think he says to himself, and because of the talent he has around him, it's not like he's playing with the Oklahoma wide receivers of old he had with Lincoln Riley. It's a lower caliber of athlete. He's not athlete, but receiver talent he's dealing with it at South Carolina. I think he's trying to do too much. He's not taking the good play. He's waiting for the great play. And then coupled with his incredible arm talent, he kind of thinks he can just make every throw. Oh, I can fit that in that window. Oh, I can beat that. I can beat that ball to the boundary and not have the safety get over there. His biggest completions today came not fitting it in a window or reading a good defense and layering the throw, getting it over the linebacker inside the safety. He's on just busted coverages. I mean, just guys that are just WSO, wide ass open, WAO. And coupled with his, I guess, trying to push the offense too much with his own arm ability, South Carolina just can't run the ball. I mean, last week against Georgia State, it was like 2.5 yards. It was like 1.5 against Arkansas. O-line's bad. Spencer's trying to do too much. They can't run. And the defense is not what it was. Last year, South Carolina was only allowing 24 points a game. It's not going to happen. Like Arkansas got 44 on them, and Arkansas is good. Arkansas is really good this year. They look pretty decent. They were banged up in the secondary. They're going to get one. They got one out for the year in the secondary now, but Jalen Catalon, he's like a fifth-year guy. But Arkansas looks good, and South Carolina's got to clean it up if we want another bowl game from this Beamer-era team. And it's interesting. How long is Spencer going to stay there? Let's say they go 5-7, 4-8. He was draft eligible last year. This is his fourth year. I don't know. Does he slip? I mean, if he doesn't have a good year, he's going to just fall more in the draft. So I don't know what you do there, but we're definitely going to keep an eye on South Carolina. Another big game from Saturday, Tennessee-Pitt. Tennessee wins 34-27. This game pretty much came down to, and I told you, Tennessee's offense, wide open, just receivers 2 yards from the sideline. They're going to throw a lot of deep balls at you. And Pitt, under Pat Narduzzi, is going to pretty much just stay in a cover two, two-man shell with man defense underneath. And Tennessee did what they were going to do. They threw the ball downfield consecutively, and I think Pitt did a pretty good job of preventing the big play. There was one or two that slipped through the cracks. Pitt's problem was, again, we talked about Narduzzi wanting to run the ball a lot more under center, and they were putting themselves in some bad third down situations. They had to convert at least 4 that I saw third and longs in the first half. 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 11. And just making Keaton Slovis having to bail them out. And then he ends up, because of Pat Narduzzi being stupid, down, they got like 14 seconds left. They're on their own 25. This is in the second quarter, right before half. He decides, okay, now we're going to be aggressive. Let's drop back pass, and Slovis gets planted into the turf with a concussion. So they're going to play the backup in the second half, and he is not as good as Slovis. And he was under some pressure too. I mean, Tennessee just said, screw it. We're going to blitz and make the kid, beat some coverage. And he couldn't do it. Now, the defense was awesome because they held Tennessee almost scoreless. They held Tennessee to 10 points in the second half. Tennessee had 24 at half. So the defense kept them in it. And in fact, almost putting them in scoring positions. Fumble recovery by the defense and a muff punt allow Pitt to have the opportunity to tie the game late without Keaton Slovis. Now, this is after I watched it. I didn't watch it live. I thought pretty much you should this game goes to overtime. This game, it ends up going to overtime at 27-all, and I liked their going for 2 at the end of regulation because your offense was very much, if it wasn't, now you are in scoring position in overtime, but I mean, your defense had just done so much. You weren't going to stop Tennessee, I don't think, much in overtime, and your offense was going to struggle to get into the end zone. It's not just like, oh, fine, we'll kick field goals. Like, that's not going to work. So I think going for 2 there late would have been the better option. But Pitt, too much commitment to the run game, puts them in bad 3rd and long scenarios. Tennessee's looking awesome. I cannot wait for Tennessee, Florida, and Kentucky to all start playing each other. I think that's going to be an absolute wild ride in the East. More on that later. And Slovis will come back. I think he's cleared protocol and everything, so we'll see him this weekend. But Pitt's got to clean it up. I mean, they can't be running that. They can't be. It's like they're running like 38 times for 3.5 yards a carry. Like, it's just you're minimizing your offensive output when you're committing so much to the run for so little gain. I'll leave it at that. Kentucky and Florida, 26-16, another kind of rock-fighty game. No, I expected Florida to come out with Anthony Richardson and to have another nice game plan for him, get him on some rollouts and some boot action, and let him be the athlete he was against Utah. And Kentucky said, none of that. No. We are going to make sure he stays in the pocket. We're going to put pressure if he escapes, and we are going to play zone coverage behind him, which I thought was really interesting, and make him layer throws or communicate with receivers how they need to stop a route between zones or whatever. So he ends up throwing 2 picks, one in his own red zone, backed up at his own goal line, and he ends up making the tackle at like the 10. But UK's offense didn't look that much great either. I mean, this game was like 13-13 at half. Like, it wasn't. No one was blowing the doors off anybody. UK's got the offensive line. I thought we talked about it in the East preview. I thought Kentucky, they did lose a lot on the offensive line. I trusted the recruiting and the guys they had waiting in the wings. It's just not there, and I think that's really just starts. I mean, if you don't have the experience there, it really hampers your ability to come in and be effective early. So maybe the Kentucky offensive line gets a little bit better later in the season, but I think it's not the blue wall that we're used to seeing out of Kentucky. And they're still missing running back Rodriguez. So it's just a bit tough for Will Levis in the passing game without a solid – I mean, they're doing okay with Kavonte Smoke, but his passing is really suffering from the lack of pass protection. The defense holds Florida scoreless in the second half, so it was 16-13 or 16-all at the end of the first half, and they end up scoring a TD late. The defense does. So really, it was the Kentucky defense just had an excellent game plan against Florida, executed perfectly. Anthony Richardson is still a great athlete, but more to work on his passing game and reading defenses in order to make that next step. And really, I think that's because he doesn't have the reps. I mean, this is his 4th year, so he was 20. This is his 3rd season. His first year was the COVID season, and he just hasn't had a lot of in-game experience, and I don't really trust what Dan Mullen was doing at the quarterback position in terms of an athlete like Anthony Richardson. He was definitely more of a project for Dan Mullen, and he's just pretty raw. So, but he's in good hands with Billy Napier, who likes athletic quarterbacks. Washington State at Wisconsin. Holy goodness. Wazoo, the Cougs, go into Camp Randall and pull off the upset 17-14. Holy crap. I didn't get any eyes on this until I watched the replays on YouTube. Washington State absolutely just steals one. Wisconsin had 11 penalties for 106 yards and 3 turnovers. Now, Washington State also did have turnovers, had 3 themselves, but Wisconsin just shot itself in the foot. Pretty unorthodox of a Wisconsin team to do that, and just couldn't hit. I mean, obviously they're not a big explosive team, but they weren't as consistent down to down as you want Wisconsin to be if they're going to be that slow glacial pace that they normally run. So what I had at the end of this in my notes is I need more data on both teams. Washington State played Idaho in the first week of the season, and they looked rough. I mean, they didn't seal the deal against Idaho. And actually, Idaho had a Hail Mary from like the 50 to like tie the game. So it whoa, like definitely needed more to see. And Washington State has a transfer quarterback named Cam Ward. They got him from Incarnate Word, and he's very athletic. Didn't really get to showcase it a lot here. I thought they were going to be more of a more air raidy kind of team, and they seem to just be kind of essentially at the end. Cam Ward was just picking up first downs with his legs, just drop back pass scramble. So I mean, if it works, it's not sustainable, but it worked for this game. He made a couple good throws. He's just, their offensive line isn't great, and he's got good legs, so that's just kind of that's going to fit. But I want to see more out of Wisconsin. I always have a tough time really reading what Wisconsin is really doing to shoot themselves in the foot. Like, they had a bunch of yards. Like, they had like almost 500 yards of offense with 14 points. Like, just doesn't make sense. I mean, turnovers, yes, but like, need more data. Last few games of the night, we're going out west. We had Byu and Baylor playing in Provo, Utah, and BYU wins 26-20 in double overtime. BYU does this without their top two wide receivers in Puka Nacua and Gunnar Romney. Gunnar Romney is undisclosed injury from training camp, and Puka Nacua suffered an ankle injury in the previous week. So IDK. What's going on with him and coming back, and Gunnar as well. Sloppy game on both sides. We had 22 combined penalties, 14 penalties for Baylor. And Baylor's passing game was pretty stagnant. Was not a lot there. And Baylor just ended up to at the end of regulation from about 20 yards in the red zone, just ran it like 5 of 6 times to score and take the game to overtime, which was just pretty cool that Baylor can do that. They have a really good offensive line. But at that point in the game, they just completely abandoned the passing game. Silver lining for BYU here is if they can get healthy, if they can get these guys back, because BYU could not do a lot through the air. They're decent at running the ball, as they always are. But really had to lean more on Jared Hall, their quarterback, doing a little bit more with the legs. He actually caught a touchdown pass, which was pretty cool to see. But they got to get healthy at receiver and have this passing game work, because their schedule, now BYU is an independent program and will join the Big 12 next season. However, for this year, they are still independent. But their schedule this year is nuts. They're pretty much playing a Power 5 schedule. In the next 3 weeks, they play at Oregon, home against Arkansas, and home against Utah. Three teams that all three run the ball pretty well, and all three have good defenses. You've got to be able to get some points there to win those games. Huge if it happens. Speak it into existence. If BYU can get through this schedule 12-0, maybe even 11-1, but I doubt it. They don't have that conference championship bump. If they can go undefeated on this schedule, it gets easier at the end. They do have USC, but college football playoff with this schedule, they have better resumes than teams that are in conferences, like the ACC. So let's speak it into existence, BYU to the playoff. But they, gritted out a home overtime win here, where their kicker, Oldroyd, who's really good, they call him the automatic make or something like that. Blake, I think it's Blake Oldroyd. They call him Blake the Make. Yeah, that's it. And he bricked like 3 field goals in the last 5 minutes, like one in regulation and 2 in regulation and 1 in overtime. So there we go. Baylor looks good. Made that they chose a younger quarterback in training camp and had their veteran just basically were like, yeah, we're gonna go with the young guy. Go ahead and transfer. He ends up going to Liberty and then gets hurt. Or no, he goes to South Florida. Liberty was the other guy. Bohannon, I think it is. I don't know, whoever the South Florida starter is right now. All right, last game of the night, we had Oregon State at Fresno State. This one went to the last play of the game. Oregon State wins 35-32. This was everything we want out of late night college football. It was awesome and a great West Coast game. And Oregon State is fun, guys. Oregon State is not back because it's Oregon State, but they're like a fun team to watch now. You don't just hide them away on Pac-12 Network during the midday. I think they're going to get some primetime stuff going on. Oregon State is down 3 with 3 seconds left on the clock, and they're at the 2 or 3 yard line. They're at the 2 because they got pass interference in the end zone at the previous play. So they could kick the field goal right there and go to overtime. Screw it. No, we're going for it. They go for the TD, and basically they run QB power right. They have this guy listed on the roster, Jack Coletto. He's a linebacker on the roster, but he also plays quarterback in the run game and also plays a bit of fullback. 6'3", 240, Swiss Army knife kind of player. The perfect late-night college football darling player that we all want to see when we're watching football at 1:30 in the morning. A guy that you just saw make a sack on defense comes in and just goes for a 25-yard gain on QB power right or a fullback dive. Oregon State's got a really fun offense this year. They love to pound the rock. Their pass defense, I think, is one of the best in the Pac-12, if not probably top 30 in the country. They struggle against the run a little bit. And Jake Haener for Fresno State is awesome. I mean, I think he's definitely going to get drafted. Fresno State has trouble. They attempt 6 field goals in this game, make 4 of them. And 4 of them were in the red zone. So just not really finishing drives there. And I think that's what ends up hurting. I mean, they literally kick a field goal to go up 3 with 2:10 left, 2:20 left, and Oregon State goes down the field. But again, a fun late night game. So I'm gonna end this episode about 35 minutes here. We're going to have a little look-in on some of the power conferences here and kind of some notes that I got going on. So my look-in for the ACC, we've got a couple 2-0 teams that I did not expect to be 2-0. Duke and Syracuse, both 2-0. UNC, 3-0. Preseason thought for me was UNC was going to drop one of App or Georgia State. They win both. Yes, by a combined 9 points, so it's not like they packed those in. They should have lost the App State game, but they looked a lot more qualified against Georgia State. It was nice to see for UNC that they were up 35-28, and they couldn't close on offense. They ended up punting. So the defense has to get a stop with 2:30 left, and they do. They end up forcing a 4th down. They stop Georgia State. Get the ball back. We knee it out. We go home. So I thought that was a nice improvement. Now, it was Georgia. I mean, hey, Georgia State and App could be on the same page. Georgia State has played South Carolina and North Carolina, 2 Power 5 teams. App State has as well and went 1-1. So I guess they're maybe better, but Georgia State is no slouch. So I thought it was nice, especially for the UNC defense, who gave up a 60-burger last week. Come on. Improvement. I still think they don't know they don't tackle well. They aren't sound. They get lost in coverage. It's just bizarre what's going on with that defense. It was nice to see Wake Forest back in full strength against Vanderbilt. Sam Hartman comes back and gets 300 yards in passing and 4 touchdowns. This is all in a rain game too. Also had a really cool, because of that slow mesh stuff that Wake does, the running back, essentially, if he's given the ball, is then his idea is to make linebackers misfit the read and is basically baiting a linebacker to dive into a gap and then go the opposite way. So a lot of times those runs, if the line kind of just remains this, you'll watch Wake play, there's just this wall of jerseys, and they're just trying to make the linebackers crash into the wall and then go the opposite side. And so a lot of times Sam, after handing the ball off, or the quarterback for Wake Forest, kind of is free if the running back bounces it to lead block. And obviously, you don't want your quarterback doing that all the time, but Sam Hartman's pretty good at it and is good at timing it up to where after he gives the ball, he'll see the lane open before the running back almost, and he just does a good job of then finding that outside corner or slot corner or safety that is coming in to fill that outside gap and just throw a shoulder into the Vandy safety, making a one-on-one with the free safety coming down for Quentin Cooley, who just juke move and gets in there for 25-yard touchdown. Second-year redshirt freshman, nice to see him get the tutty there. But cool, I mean, Sam Hartman has done it before. I've literally seen him do it in multiple games. Just a cool part of that offense that if the quarterback's willing to throw a block, it can really help that out. And then you literally have 7 people blocking because offensive line, tight end, and him. Back to Syracuse being 2-0. They got something's cooking up in Syracuse now. I did say I thought the offense up there was going to be fun. I thought it was going to be entertaining. I didn't think it was going to show in the win-loss column because that defense is light. Lite, light. They don't have a defensive lineman that starts that is like over 270 pounds. They got a defensive end that's like 220. They are light up front. I watched their game against Louisville. I don't know how Louisville just didn't play pound the rock. It was very odd to watch them not just play power on Syracuse and get one-on-ones on the outside. Had a terrible game plan going in my opinion. Look for teams to do that against Syracuse going forward now that we know Syracuse is balling. Garrett Schroeder, I talked about it. I said he's a great runner, but he's not accurate, and he's got like 50% pass completion. Dude's throwing it about 70% pass completion for the first two games combined. One of them is against UConn, Mike. Yes, I get it. Don't worry. Like, we're taking it anyway. The dude is doing great. He's like a fourth-year junior, transfer from Mississippi State. I mean, they got a great 1-2 punch with Sean Taylor and him in the backfield. That read option game, RPO, whatever you want to call it, is cooking. And he's throwing the ball accurately. The offense, they got the offensive coordinator from UVA last season, and UVA had an awesome offense. And that guy can just flat or like Ein. We'll talk about Syracuse on Thursday. I'm flabbergasted with how Syracuse is able to flip this switch right now. It's 2 games. I get it, but man, it's awesome to see. End on a down note here. Long year for BC, Boston College. They're now down their top 8 offensive linemen from last season. They lost 4 to aging. They just aged out. The 5th guy, who is their best returner, got an ACL injury in a pickup basketball game over the summer. And now they've lost the top 3 or the top 2 backups from last year to injury. They've basically got an FCS starting offensive line out there. And they're getting killed. They got murdered by Virginia Tech, not by points, but offensively. They only got it past the 50 twice. So we got a quick shout out, salute to you, Phil Drakovic, for coming back. Phil Drakovic could have gone pro last year. He would have been a later pick. Like, he kind of came back to improve his draft stock, but I mean, he's going to be spending a lot of this year, especially when they get into conference play, on his back, unless they don't do something drastic with this offense. So good on you, Phil, for coming back and showing the BC faithful proud and committing to the program. But man, we stay healthy. Stay healthy, Phil, because this is not looking good. We're going to go out to the SEC, just go down south a little bit. As I said, the East Division is looking great. Tennessee, Kentucky, and Florida all look like pretty decent contenders. I knew Tennessee and Kentucky were, but we really wanted a third team to emerge there. I thought it was going to be South Carolina, but it looks more like Florida can be that team. Outside of, obviously, I said second place because Georgia's in the first. My big game, I can't wait for it. It was way down the line. UT versus Georgia. Now, Tennessee does play Alabama before then, not like right before, but like before that game happens. So I think that'll be actually a good baseline for maybe how they would play against Georgia. But Tennessee played Alabama pretty decent for 3 quarters last year. So I'm interested to see how Tennessee, because Tennessee just mashes the gas pedal. I mean, the thing's on the floor for like the entire game, and they make you play a lot of plays. I'm interested to see how Georgia might try to pull that back or run. Does Georgia? Because if Georgia says no, we're gonna run with you, then that game could get really fun. Alabama has 2 weeks to sort out. Here's my thing on Alabama. They have 2 weeks to sort out their offensive woes at wide receiver and offensive line. They've got ULM and Vandy coming up next. There it was. Their next test will be at Arkansas on the 1st. And I think those actually are the top 2 teams in the SEC West right now. Because A&M is looking like hot trash. LSU is not off the bus yet, in my opinion. And actually, Mississippi State, they got a big game this week against LSU. That'll be kind of the litmus test on Mississippi State of whether or not we're coming to party this year with Mike Leach. But, yeah, Alabama basically has a bye week next week with ULM and then home against Vanderbilt. So 2 weeks to sort out the kinks. So it'll be fun to look at the film for Alabama these next 2 weeks to see how they're making the adjustments. Also, Texas A&M panic mode. All right, we're gonna look in at the Big Ten. Michigan names their starter and J.J. McCarthy. Interesting thing Jim Harbaugh did this year with Michigan. He didn't name a starter. He said we're gonna start McNamara week 1 and J.J. McCarthy week 2. And then we're going to take the better of the two because they played Colorado State and Hawaii. Hawaii is basically an FCS program this year. Go Bows. And Colorado State is in a massive rebuild. It's looking real bad. They lost to MTSU this weekend, so we could be in tear it down to the studs at Colorado State. But, yeah, they kind of did this. And both quarterbacks obviously played in both games because they just blew them out twice. But J.J. McCarthy against Hawaii he was like 9 of 10 for $144 and 2 touchdowns. Like, dude looked awesome. So, and next week they play UConn, so it's not like they're going to play both of them again. But it was cool that Harbaugh did. I think he's getting flack for this, or like people roll their eyes at it. I mean, if you really don't know, or I think for him it was like you want to show loyalty to McNamara, who was your quarterback last season and really helped you guys. He was their quarterback throughout last season and helped them get to the postseason, and they rode with him. And you don't want to just dump the guy coming out of camp, and then JJ looks weak, and then you have all this garbage in the media. So yeah, put it on Front Street. You're gonna start, and everyone else can see the results. So it's a very transparent way of selecting a quarterback. Now you can only do this when your schedule is that soft. So they really don't play anybody until October, so they still have a couple weeks to figure this out. The West Division of the Big Ten is complete mediocrity. Iowa currently has a nepotism problem within their program. Kirk Ferentz, his son, runs the offense. The offense has scored. Man, I'm not giving them the touchdown. So they've scored 3 points because the touchdown they got last week against Iowa State won 10-7 over Iowa. The touchdown that Iowa scored against Iowa State came off a block punt that set them up at the 15-yard line. So they have not, and I think the field goal that they got against South Dakota State in the first weekend was like off like a fumble recovery or a pick or something. So they can't move the ball. It's the worst passing offense in the country by far. So What's going to happen at Iowa? Because if they don't start scoring points, they're not going to beat a lot of people, and it could get feisty over there with the fans as well as the media. Lastly, we're going to go out west to look at the Pac-12. We've got a juggernaut in the University of Southern Cal Trojans on offense. I mean, they're top 5 in the country. Lincoln Riley has brought Oklahoma to Hollywood, and it's going awesome. They are scoring buku amount of points. However, that defense is extremely shaky, especially against the run. I think Wake Forest has a better defense than USC does this season. You heard it here first. The number, like Rice had some good rushing numbers, and Stanford against UNC this past week just got boat raced because they kept turning the ball over in the red zone. They had like 2 fumbles on the goal line. Straight up Denver Bronco problems right there. So USC is going to be a lot of fun. I'm actually going to be seeing them play Arizona State on the 1st of October. So I'm really excited about that. More on the road trip. I'll talk about that more on Thursday. But throughout the Pac-12, there's a lot of, you had Wazoo beating Washington State, or Wisconsin rather. You had Oregon State beating Fresno State. Washington has kind of made a nice about face and looks competent on offense again. You've got UCLA doing whatever the fighting chips down there are going to be doing. Arizona is not the most woeful program in the Power 5 this year. They actually look like they have their stuff together. Colorado is terrible, but one blemish for the Pac-12. I think that's fine. I think they have a stronger middle this year than they did last year. They didn't even have a good top end. It was like Utah, and it was basically Utah and Oregon, and then Oregon got blown out twice by Utah, so it was really, really bizarre. I think BYU probably could have won the conference because they played 5 teams in the Pac-12. But everyone seems to be improving from last year, or at least not getting worse. So that's it for this episode of Mike's On with College Football. I'm your host, Mike Collins. This has been our Week 2 college football review. Stay alert for Thursday. We're going to be doing our Week 3 setup with games to watch and betting lines. Also, would love to get your guys' feedback about what you want to see going forward, topics you want to cover, realignment, college football playoff, transfer portal. Going to be coming at you with kind of more quick hitters in the week. Just about like little bits of news and whatever. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at Mike's on CFB. That's Mike's on CFB. Link will be in the description below. Thank you guys so much and have a great one.